Hey everyone, in this video we're going to be looking at the practice with feedback exercises for chapter 5. And in this chapter we're going to be looking at the cost volume profit ratio analyses, looking at the variable and fixed costs, contribution margin ratios, break even point, so on and so forth. So let's get started. Okay, so our first tab here, exercise 1 to 5. I'm going to skip over these, just drop down, select the term. And the formulas here, I'll let you all fill those in yourselves based on your, let me take these out real quick, based on your notes and other resources in the book. And let's go down to exercise 5 here. So in exercise 5, it tells us that we have this company that had the following machine maintenance costs over the last several months. And it asks us to use the high-low method to estimate fixed and variable cost here. So the way we're going to get our variable cost per hour using this methodology, if you remember, it's going to be a ratio. And on the top of that ratio, again, a high-low. So we're going to take the high cost month minus the low cost month and then divide that by the hours here. And we're going to divide that by the high minus the low for those, or the amounts for those specific cost months below. So let's put that into a formula here. So our numerator then, again, like I said, is going to be our high minus our low month. So we have a 5,200 and it looks like our 2,400 is the low month. So 5,200 minus 2,400. And then we're going to divide, and we're going to take the difference in the activity for that month. In this instance, we're looking at hours. And so we've got 420 minus 140. And again, that's just associated with the two amounts there. Okay, and then we come up with estimated variable cost per hour of $10 of the variable portion. And then to figure out our total fixed cost, then we can come back using our $10 per hour. And let's use our high volume month. So we'll say $10 times the 420. So that gives us 4,200 in variable cost. And then if we look at the total cost, we can see it was 5,200. We've got 4,200. So we just want to take the additional portion beyond the variable cost, then are the fixed costs. And the way we can put that into our formula here, we'll say 5,200 in total minus the variable cost portion, which we just calculated. And it was 4,200. So we're taking 5,200 minus 4,200 gives us $1,000 total fixed costs. And we're good. Okay, and then this question asks us to kind of use that information to figure out what our costs will be overall. And so here we can see that we use the machine for 70 hours. What should it estimate for maintenance costs? So we need to factor in the variable and the fixed portion of the costs. And so again, the fixed costs, which they're fixed, they don't change, that'll be 1,000. So we'll have that as one portion, 1,000. And then let's look at our variable piece is going to be $10 per hour times 70 hours, just using those two metrics. And then the 1,000 we're just adding on, because that's our fixed. So if we used it for 70, that would bring us to 1,700. So again, the 1,000 fixed, which is just the baseline amount we're going to have to pay one way or the other. And then we have 70 hours, so we're going to use our $10 per hour calculated to come up with the $700 portion to add on to the $1,000 fixed. All right, let's look at the next exercise here. So in this problem, it asks us to analyze some different cost amounts here and volume. So it shows us the volumes of production kind of thing here, and then we've got dollars associated with that. And we need to look at these series and make some determinations about what kind of costs these are. So we've got the options of fixed, mixed, stepwise, and variable. So a number of different options. And the first thing we want to do when we're analyzing this, I think the easiest one here is to see this one really gives us the indication of being fixed, right? No matter how much we produce here, the costs stay the same. And that's kind of the definition of fixed. So we'll throw fixed in there, pretty easy. Another thing that we can look at here to make a determination based on these categories is if we had zero units produced, would we have costs? Because if we have costs and there's no production, that indicates that it's at least mixed, if not fixed, right? So there's some portion of costs that we're incurring even if production is zero. This one, we can look right here and see, okay, there's no costs if we're not making any products. So that would be strictly variable because we're only incurring as the units are going up. And at 0 units, we have no cost. For these two, you can see we have $1,000 with 0 and 400, and then they're going up with production still, but we do have some portion that's fixed. This would be like the fixed portion because it's that amount at 0. And so those ones are going to be mixed because there's both costs we incur when the production is at 0 and then additional costs that go up proportionally with production as production increases. And then the last one we look at here in series 3 is you kind of got this sort of fixed amount that then bumps up at different levels of production here. And so we're going to indicate that's what's called stepwise. So these costs are the same throughout this range of production, but then as you jump beyond that range, those costs jump up in kind of a stepwise fashion. You can see they start there, bump up, bump up. So, all right, hopefully that's helpful and makes some sense. Okay, let's look at our exercise number 7 here. So in this problem, it asks us to take a look at the contribution margin per unit. So we've got to do some calculations here, and we've got information above to do these analysis. And so if you remember our formula here that we have, when we look at our overall breakdown for contribution margin, or kind of that whole ratio, we have sales, minus our variable costs gets us to contribution margin, and then minus our fixed costs, and that basically gets us to pre-tax net income. So here we can see that we have sales per unit of $70 and variable costs per unit of $42, and fixed costs are $3,500. So right off the bat, it tells us how much per unit. We might have to do some division in other problems if it tells us totals and we know how many units, etc. But this one, then, with that information, if we, again, like I just mentioned, the overall formula we're working with being sales minus variable costs to get contribution margin, we can just take the difference between those two. So 70 minus 42, so $28 of contribution margin per unit. And then we can look down here and take a look at our contribution margin ratio. So whether we're doing the total or the contribution margin per unit, you can basically use either one of the examples, and you just need to divide. So what we're saying is the sales, what portion of this sales is the contribution margin. If you were to, I think that Beth put this well in the lecture video, if you had sales as a pie, what proportion of the total 100% sales would the contribution margin be taking? And in this instance, so we divide our 28 divided by 70 to give us 40%, basically. So in other words, we're saying that every time we make a sale, 40% of the proceeds of that sale is the leftovers after we account for the variable costs. Okay, so now we want to calculate our break-even point. And so and just a reminder, what the break-even point then is going to tell us is at this contribution margin ratio and our total fixed cost of $3,500, how many of these units, if we're doing it in units, do we have to sell before we are able to cover our fixed cost? So the formula we use there is fixed cost over contribution margin per unit. So 3,500 in fixed costs divided by our $28 contribution margin per unit that we calculated above. And so in essence, we would need to sell 125 units to basically make no pre-tax net income, right? I mean, that's not necessarily ideal. Sometimes that's ideal. I mean, sometimes it's just staying afloat, but at that point, you're not losing any money, is what we're basically saying. And then if we want to look at that in terms of sales, not units, then we just need to take our total fixed costs. So that, again, the 3,500 divided by our contribution margin ratio. So, we could put in 40% or as a decimal, 0.4. So we would need to have $8,750 in sales to cover our fixed costs. Okay, and then if we want a target net income of $7,000, we take a very similar approach where we are talking about sales, and so we're going to use this same formula basically. So I'm just going to copy and paste this in. But we're going to add our target net income of $7,000 to our fixed costs there of the 3,500. So the 3,500 gets us to break even, and then everything above that is net income, right? And that's what we're saying when we're doing that target net income. So good deal. Excuse me. Okay, let's take a look here, and let's do some additional problems. Okay, so here we've got sales per unit $48, variable cost of $36, fixed cost totals $6,000, and current sales total $30,000. Okay, so we have one additional kind of piece of information here. So let's do this again. Contribution margin per unit is just us taking sales minus variable costs. And then our contribution margin ratio is just taking our contribution margin per unit, for example, divided by the sales per unit. Whoop, that didn't work. Let's see. Let me see if this. I wanted to put it in percentage. So let me see if this works. 12 divided by 48. There we go. So 25% contribution margin ratio. If we want to cover our fixed costs, then our break-even point, we have $6,000 in fixed costs divided by the contribution margin per unit. So 500 units we need to sell. And then in total sales, again, we just take the 6,000, but we divide it by 0.25 or 25%. So if we sell 24,000, if we make 24,000 in sales, we will cover our fixed costs. And then the margin of safety is the difference between what our current sales is and the break-even point. So how much can our sales go down before we are at zero, essentially? So then we just take $30,000 current sales minus 24,000 gets us a margin of safety of $6,000. All right. So then, if we want to have a target net income of $7,200, basically the same kind of thing we did up here. So we just do our break-even point formula. So I'm just going to take that, copy and paste it, put some parentheses here so it'll do our calculation in the numerator first, and we want 7,200 to add into our total break-even. So if we're going to get the 7,200 in net income, we're going to need to have $52,800 in sales in order to meet our fixed costs, and then earn that much more above after accounting for the variable costs. you can really see how much of a difference it makes when you have a good margin. That really drives a pretty big difference in the amount of sales required to make net income. So lower margin, you need more in sales. Okay, so Keegan Company had sales per unit, variable cost, fixed cost, and current sales. So one more time, difference between sales minus variable cost, get our margin per unit. And then we are going to take our $7 divided by our sales number. So 20% contribution margin ratio. And then break even point in units. We've got 14,000 divided by 7. So we have to sell 2,000 to break even. 14,000 divided by 0.2. So in dollars, we need to make 70,000 in sales. And then the margin of safety here is just the difference between current sales minus break-even sales. Okay. And then one more time, then if we want to have our break-even point in sales here, we can just copy our formula the target net income of 42,000. We just take our break-even, add the 42,000 into the fixed costs. And this would tell us that we need to have total sales of $280,000 to be netting to net income to have a net income left over of $42,000 after accounting for the variable costs and the total fixed costs. So hopefully that was helpful. Yeah, pretty easy calculations, but definitely something that's worthwhile to practice and make sure that it makes sense. Okay, let's go on to exercises 10, 11, and 12. So NB Company had sales per unit of $150 and a contribution margin ratio of 0.6. Its fixed cost total $36,000, and it wants to earn a target net income of $18,000 after taxes. Assume a tax rate of 25%. Compute pre-tax net income and calculate the following. So, all right, in this problem, we need to look at our break-even point in sales first. And let's see what we have here. We've got fixed costs, we've got target net income, sales per unit, and a contribution margin ratio. So if we have a contribution margin ratio of 0.6, then we know that 0.4, the other part of the pie, then is going to be the contribution margin piece. Or maybe I'm saying that. Let me say that one more time. So a contribution margin ratio of 6.6, again, if we look back at how we got there from some of these problems, was to say if we take the contribution margin divided by the sales per unit, that equals the 40%. So kind of doing some algebra there. And so if we want to figure that out another way to get contribution margin per unit, then we could take 0.6 times 150. And that's not going to give us the answer here, or it's not going to, be the final answer, but that's going to be a part of what we're going to need. So if we're taking 60%, so if we're saying the contribution margin ratio is 60% of 150, that would mean that the contribution margin is $90. In other words, if we say $90 divided by 150, that gets us 60%, basically 0.6. Okay, so then if we want to get our break-even point in sales, then, as we look back here, we can kind of see what's our, contribution margin ratio divided by the totals. And I think we might even, let's see, okay, so we had 60%. So I think we can even get this just from knowing, let's see here, divided by 0.6. Yeah, so we didn't even need to actually get the dollar amount. I mean, that's kind of handy just to know what that, be able to move between these and figure out what that's showing. But using the contribution margin ratio, if we're just doing this in sales, then we could do the 60%. If we wanted to know what the units were, then we would need to get the actual dollar figure. Okay, so then it says we want to earn target net income of $18,000 after taxes, and assume a tax rate of 25% here. So if we're going to figure out the amount of pre-tax net income, so we need to figure out the target net income to get after taxes. We want to earn a target net income of $18,000 after taxes. What does that mean we're going to need to earn before taxes? So with that, how we figure that out, and again, this is not going to give us the answer immediately, but it's a part of what we're doing. We need to figure out our net income before taxes to figure out what it would be, as we're targeting after taxes, etc. So let's just do that real quick. So to figure out what our target net income before taxes, we need to take our 18,000 target net income after tax divided by 1 minus 0.25. Oh, and this one just actually told us that this is what the pre-tax net income target is. Okay. So we didn't need to know. Oh, it didn't ask. Yeah. So I thought this was going to ask us what is the sales that we would then need to earn to get the 24,000. That would be, we would go back and take this number, add in 36,000 plus 24,000 to get us to the amount of sales we would need to get pre-tax net income of 24,000, which after the tax rate would then, taxes would bring us down to 18,000. So anyway, this is the pre-tax net income we need to earn. And yeah, hopefully that makes sense. Okay, Joel Company had sales per unit of $28, variable cost per unit of $14, fixed cost $52.50, and it wants to earn a target net income of $21,000 after taxes. Assuming a tax rate of 25%, calculate pre-tax T&I, and then calculate the following sales required. So this is kind of what I was talking about above. So we need to first figure out what pre-tax net income we're targeting, and then doing that, we need to from there we can figure out how much sales we need to cover our fixed costs to give us enough income that after taxes gets us to 21,000. So step one, figure out our T&I before tax. So again, we have 21,000, and then divide that by 1 minus the tax rate. Cool. Need to put an equal sign in there. So we're targeting $28,000 of pre-tax income to arrive at 21,000 after taxes are taken out, right? So that's handy information to have. And then, so 28,000. So that's cool. So let's I'm going to put that, kind of put that on my, put that on our notes. I'm going to write that down. It's kind of hard to put it on in these, you can't put it in the blank space here because these practice with feedback problems, or we can just put it down here for now, but you just take your notes, right? So, okay, 28,000 is what we're shooting for. Now let's figure out how much sales we need to get to arrive at $28,000. So again, we need to do our contribution margin ratio. We need that. And our contribution margin ratio, then we've got $28 minus $14. So we have $14 of contribution margin per unit. And then if we took that 14 divided by 28, then we get, if you put this into a decimal or a percentage, that's going to be 50%. Okay. And you kind of tell that, okay, we have a 50% contribution margin ratio. So if we take 5250 divided by 0.5, oops, then that tells us our break-even point would be 10,500. But then if we want to target, again, 28,000. And so we need to then have $66,500 in sales, which will allow us to cover our fixed costs and then net $28,000 in pre-tax net income. And then after we take out the 25% tax rate, that'll bring us to this 21,000 that we're targeting essentially. So kind of a multi-step problem. We'll do some practice on like with this in class, because I think that is one that you sort of have to think through, have some notes off to the side. It's not rocket science, but it definitely requires some doing to understand how to arrive at that figure. But again, we had to figure out, first of all, what our target pre-tax net income was to hit our target after-tax income. And we needed to figure out our contribution margin ratio, which we could do. And with those two pieces of information, we were able to get the sales required for our target after-tax net income. Okay, great. Let's go on to exercise 12. Todd Company sells our product for $30 per unit. There's a contribution margin ratio of 30%. Fixed costs are $4,500. If we want to earn a pre-tax net income of $9,000, how many units must be sold? So here we can, again, kind of first figure out our contribution margin per unit. So if it's 30%, if we take $30 times 0.3, then we get $9 per unit. And then if we say 4,500 divided by 9, and we're trying to, that would be our break-even point. Oops. But we want to add 9,000 on top of it. And so 1,500 units must be sold. So again, we know our sales price. We can use our contribution margin ratio to figure out what the contribution margin per unit is, which was 30%. So that was $9 per unit. To figure out our break-even point in units, we divide our fixed cost by the per unit contribution margin per unit. And then if we want a target net income of 9,000, we just add that onto that 0. So everything above that's the profit. And we arrive at the 9,000. So we'd have to sell 1,500 to meet our goals there. So, all right. Well, thanks, everybody. Hopefully that was helpful. And I will see you in the next video. All right. Bye.